keep coming in, but that's okay. Alicia Williams is going to go first. She's going to be talking about Hurricane Katrina, and then Sky Barlow is going to be talking about the landscape of modern slavery. So Alicia, you can start when you're ready for the questions. People can just type their questions in the chat box, and then you can just follow down and read through those, Alicia. Read the question out loud so that it gets recorded. And then when you're all done, you'll have 5 minutes for questions. You can stop sharing, and then Sky can start sharing. So thanks to both of you for presenting today, and thanks everybody for coming.
So hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Alicia Williams, and for my capstone proposal presentation, I'll be speaking with you about my research on Hurricane Katrina. It's a land cover change detection analysis spanning 15 years. Landfalling major hurricanes cause catastrophic damage, and on August 29th, 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall in Louisiana as a major hurricane. Although the hurricane weakened to a Category 3 prior to landfall, it still carried with it much of the storm surge it had built as a Category 5. According to the National Hurricane Center, storm surge reached 30 feet in this area. So Hurricane Katrina was one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in US history. These images from Google Earth show some of the devastation. You can see how there is significant less greenness in the image on the right due to the vegetation death from the storm surge inundation. Many homes were destroyed, and if you look at the marina in this image in the top left, you can see that there was actually a complete loss of boats in the area. Damage was actually estimated at 125 billion US dollars in 2005. And these false color images from the Mississippi River Delta region show some of the changes that we can expect to find in my land cover assessment. The false color composite uses the near infrared band displayed with the red gun. So the healthy vegetation should appear red. Compared to the image on the right, you can see that there is significantly less redness and increased areas of water. Wetlands are very important to coastal ecosystems because they have very high levels of biodiversity, and they're also a major source of carbon sequestration, which is really important to the environment. Specifically, the Mississippi River Delta wetlands are home to 60% of the Gulf coastal wetlands, and so they play a really important role in reducing storm surge in that area. The objectives of this research study is to discover how Hurricane Katrina changed the landscape of southeastern Louisiana and how the landscape has recovered these 15 years since the hurricane struck. In order to accomplish this, I will use medium resolution Landsat imagery in order to create multi-temporal NDVI, which will assist in more accurate object-based land cover classification models. And I'll be getting into all of this in more detail in the next few slides. So Hurricane Katrina moved directly north over the Mississippi River Delta region, putting much of the wetlands in the most intense part of the eye wall, the northern section. Landsat imagery of moderate resolution will be used for analysis over the entire area of interest. I'm also fortunate to work for Maxar Technologies, so they've graciously allowed me to download high resolution imagery for my analysis. I will use this imagery to assess the accuracy of the land cover classification created using the Landsat imagery. So as you can see in the map, it does cover a smaller area of the AOI. So that's how I'll perform my accuracy assessment. So Landsat imagery has a resolution of about 30 meters, and I was able to obtain nearly cloud-free imagery for all 3 time periods. The high resolution Maxar imagery is about 2-meter resolution, And for the first and second time period, I did have to mosaic from 3 separate dates in order to achieve the minimal cloudiness. This is an overview of my methodology workflow, so I'll be getting into this in more detail over the next several slides. First of all, Google Earth Engine is an online open source software that works in the cloud. In this case, I was able to use Google Earth Engine to sort through a large stack of imagery to find the least cloudy imagery in my area of interest for each time period and during the preferred time of year, and then to clip the imagery to my area of interest, all without having to download large amounts of imagery to my local computer. Time period 1 and time period 2 come from the Landsat 5 thematic mapper satellite sensor, and time period 3 came from the Landsat 8 operational land imager satellite sensor. So these required harmonization in order to ensure accurate change detection could be performed. So what is harmonization? So the process of harmonization is a spectral transformation function. It standardizes the spectral response of the pixels, which minimizes the constraints of different spectral, spatial, and radiometric properties so that images from different sensors can be accurately compared. As you can see in this image, in the red box specifically, there are large differences in the near infrared band wavelengths that are captured by the different sensors, which you can tell by the size and shape of the light pink purple box. NDVI is the normalized difference vegetation index. It's a band ratio that normalizes near infrared and red bands, which is very useful for mapping vegetation health, biomass, and vegetation changes. The results of the ratio range from -1 to 1, and the smaller numbers will indicate things like non-plant matter. That can be rooftops, water, and then the higher values indicate healthy plants. So generally speaking, this image is a good guide for assessing plant health. Numbers from 0 to 0.33 usually indicate unhealthy plants, and then values above 0.66 would indicate very healthy plants. So because this project is actually building on some of my previous work, I do have a good idea of what to expect. This image is a change analysis I did comparing the NDVI prior to Hurricane Katrina to the NDVI 2 months after landfall. The very dark reddish brown colors show areas of significant decrease in NDVI, which would indicate destruction of previously healthy plant matter. And a land cover classification is defined as the observed biophysical cover of the Earth's surface. So not to be confused with land use classifications, which is more related to how the land is being used, like whether it's agriculture or a park. But land cover is more strictly related to the spectral response, and it's usually confined to vegetation and man-made features. This land cover classification will be analyzed by discovering the spatial differences between the time periods. For example, as you can see here, there were wetlands in time period 1 that changed into the water class in time period 2, or after the hurricane. So this type of change detection is useful for giving a name to the types of changes that we discover. So in this case, you can see we're calling this wetland loss. And so it helps us to also quantify the change area, because now we can calculate the amount of area that changed from wetland to water in this example. And again, I do have some results from previous studies on this topic, so I expect to find similar results with this study. In a previous study, I found that the largest changes in land cover classifications were wetland to bare earth and wetlands to water. So this builds on the previous NDVI changes that were found. We know that the plant matter died, but now we also know that either the land was washed away completely and became part of the water class, or the land remained, but the vegetation on that land died. One previous study did measure the change of wetland to water after Hurricane Katrina as 230 square kilometers. My previous analysis here actually measured that figure as 258 square kilometers. So that puts my research on par with previous studies. But wetland to bare earth has not been measured in previous studies that I could find. In my previous study, this figure measured as 624 square kilometers. So that's even more staggering. So I do think that this analysis builds on previous research. So object-based analysis is useful for differentiating classes when they have similar spectral characteristics. A pixel-based analysis would have a difficult time differentiating something like bright white sand on a beach to a bright white rooftop. Even with supervised classifications where you're doing a lot of manual training, classification models still tend to struggle with many classes. But object-based image analysis allows for context clues. For example, in eCognition, you can create a rule set that will include things like, is the shape of the object rectangular? Or does it share a side with water? So studies have shown that land cover classifications created using the object-based image analysis method can actually increase accuracy up to 8%. So that's the method that I've chosen for this analysis. So as I previously mentioned, eCognition allows for the creation of rule sets. These are ways that you assist the model in differentiating classes. So the first step is to allow the machine to segment the image into an image object by grouping like pixels. So for this study, I used the multi-resolution segmentation, which separates out different spectral signatures based on pixels alone first, then based on pixels and their neighbors to form groups, and then it merges the like groups to form image objects. In the eCognition rule set, we begin to separate the image objects to assign them to certain classes. Rules include NDVI, near infrared values, blue values, and shape of the object like asymmetry or rectangular fit. Wetlands in this study is defined as non-forested wetlands dominated by wetland herbaceous vegetation, salt marshes, freshwater meadows, wet prairies, and open bogs. In my current testing phase of my rule set, I've been able to successfully differentiate mostly the water, urban, bare earth, vegetation, and wetlands class. I'm currently working through some confusion of the wetland, vegetation, and urban classes, which I think I may have been able to solve by creating a mixed urban and vegetation class. So the reason why this is needed is because at 30-meter resolution, there does tend to be a good amount of pixel mixing. So pixels where trees and rooftops combine tend to reflect similarly to the wetland class. So this giving the option of the mixed urban and vegetation pixel class does seem to help the model in differentiating this. So once I'm satisfied visually with the land cover classification output, I will extract it as a TIFF. I'll import it into ArcGIS Pro, and there I'll perform an accuracy assessment by creating 500 random points and comparing the land cover classification output at each of those points to the high resolution Maxar imagery for that time period. The result of this will be an error matrix, which will determine if the land cover classification meets accuracy standards. It will include error of omission, which is when something is not included, but it should have been. Errors of commission, which is when something was included, but should not have been. And overall error and kappa coefficient. And the kappa coefficient is another measure of accuracy. It's important because it does take into account whether or not something happened by chance. Once the land cover classifications for all 3 time periods meet accuracy standards, the change detection portion will begin. Changes will be analyzed between time periods 1 and 2, between time periods 2 and 3, and then between time periods 1 and 3. So as I'm still in the testing phase, I'm not sure what software I'll use to perform this analysis yet. I'm looking into some NV tools, Python scripting, and also Google Earth Engine to perform this portion. Using different methodologies in previous studies, I was able to complete a preliminary version of this study. I've kind of mentioned that a little bit before. The results were promising. So I anticipate similar results, which showed a large area of wetlands destroyed and becoming part of the water class after the storm. And what was surprising, of course, was how large of an area remained part of the water class in time period 3, which would be the 15 years later. So while there was some recovery of wetlands, there's still a significant amount of wetland loss remaining. So after 15 years, it's safe to assume that much of the wetlands were permanently destroyed. So I intend to have my full analysis completed by the beginning of April and my results compiled into a draft journal article by early May. Dr. Miller and I will, of course, exchange multiple versions of this draft until the June or July timeframe. And that's when I expect to have the project completed. I would also like to just say many thanks to Maxar Technologies for the high resolution imagery, to United States Geological Survey for the Landsat imagery, and of course to Dr. Miller for his expertise and advisement. It's been invaluable. So thanks again for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alicia. Nice job. Does anybody have a question? You can just type it in the chat, or you can turn on your mic and ask it yourself if you want. I have a question in the meantime, Alicia. Oh, Fritz has a question. You could take his first, and then I'll throw mine in.
Sure. Okay, so it says, very interesting topic. You mentioned your struggles with the land cover classification and spatial resolution. How would changing to a finer or coarser spatial resolution help to solve your classification challenge? I do think that is a great idea and one that I would have loved to have pursued for this analysis. I looked through a lot of different widely available sources, including Sentinel. And of course, because I have access to high resolution Maxar technologies, that was my original goal, was actually to complete this analysis using Maxar imagery. But of course, the challenges seem to be cloud cover. That's just something that really made it difficult to be able to do this analysis. I wanted to do minimal mosaicing of imagery, and even with mosaicing, the Maxar imagery prior to the hurricane just was not sufficient to perform the analysis. Just limited coverage as well as a lot of clouds. So after the hurricane, Maxar did task the satellite to get a lot of imagery over the area, so there was plenty after, but the before just was very limited. So that's why I wasn't able to go that route. I would have liked to.
Okay, I'll ask a question in case anybody else is typing. So you had said a lot of the wetlands are destroyed and permanently destroyed potentially, and I'm assuming that what you find here is going to have implications for the future. What happens to those? Do those get reclassified? I mean, what are the implications for development and on these, wetlands that are destroyed, or do they just kind of stay as bare earth?
Yeah, so I found that they became two separate classes. So one was bare earth. So, bare islands basically, where it was previously wetlands, but that those wetlands died, and, due to storm surge, saltwater intrusion, winds, all of that, wave action. So it became either bare earth, or that entire piece of land was actually washed away, just due to changes in the bathymetry. And so then it also became the water class. So those were the two biggest changes for the wetlands. They became either bare earth or water. And so the implications are just that they have, as I said in the presentation, wetlands are very important to the environment. So carbon sequestration implications, as well as just habitats for endangered species. So it's definitely something that I would hope that this presentation gets, some interest in the topic, and we can rebuild some of the wetlands just through, human mitigation efforts.
Thanks. Yeah, I was mostly worried that they wouldn't get rebuilt and that somehow they would be claimed by, for development or something like that. But it looks like you have a lot of other good, or a couple good questions here, so I'll let you take those.
Okay, so Ryan says, you mentioned several software packages for performing parts of your analysis, including Google Earth Engine, eCognition, NV, ArcPro. Just curious, could you do everything in one program like ArcGIS? Are there specific reasons you might use some tools versus others? And so that's a really great question. Thanks for that. The main reason why I wanted to do Google Earth Engine for this part of the analysis, as far as like gathering imagery, is just because it's really easy to use. It's open source. So I knew it would be a type of analysis that others could replicate. And then also the fact that I can clip it to the AOI in Google Earth Engine, so I don't have to download full Landsat scenes. So just for, space issues, to take up less space. And then the reason why I chose eCognition is really just because it's a software that I'm more comfortable with. I've had training in doing object-based image analysis in eCognition. I did look into other options, as far as ArcGIS Pro has some good image classification options these days. But I just didn't find that the results were comparable. eCognition just seemed to perform a little bit better. And so that's really why I chose that. And then again, just ArcGIS Pro does have some really good image classification tools. And so that's why I'm doing the accuracy assessment there, just because that's, one thing that they really improved versus ArcGIS. So it creates the error matrix for you, instead of back in the day having to calculate kappa coefficient by hand. So that's something that Arc does now. So thanks for your question, Ryan. And then Blake says, great presentation. I live in Lafayette, Louisiana, and I'm a wetland biologist working on the Louisiana coastline. Over the last 2 years, we've experienced many storms in the western portion of the state. How easily could you change your area of interest to a different area of the state? Lots of legwork, or is there some automation involved that could make this easier? So that's a really great question. My goal is to make sure that my methodology is repeatable. So although I do think that there would be some legwork involved in changing the area of interest, I think that it would be minimal. I considered changing my area of interest, just based on lots of other things that have happened. I decided to stick with Hurricane Katrina because I really liked the ability to do the 15-year analysis to see if there had been recovery. But I think that once a good rule set is built in eCognition, then ideally that should be able to transfer to other areas of interest. So hopefully it would be able to be repeatable. So I think that's a great idea.
Very good. Okay, unless we see it, we'll wait here another, you can stop sharing. We'll wait for another few seconds, see if there are any other questions. Okay, well, I don't think so. So thank you so much, Alicia. Good job. We got some claps
Thank you.
there. And Sky, whenever you're ready to start sharing, you can go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Great presentation, Alicia. That was really interesting. And working for Maxar, I'm sure that helps out a lot. That's cool. And all right. I think we're up.
Yep.
Great, perfect. All right, well, thank you, Beth. Thanks, Alicia, and thank you to all of you for signing on to hear this talk. My proposal, I've been working on this for the better part of a year already, just setting up relationships and trying to get traction on things. So within the past just couple of months, I finally gotten traction on it with some outside organizations. So I'm looking forward to how this moves forward. So that said, my capstone proposal is the landscape of modern slavery, and I'll be looking at forced labor in the Democratic Republic of Congo in their artisanal cobalt mining industry, and how GIS and machine learning can help in the struggle against it. So first, we'd like to do a little bit of background on forced labor. Now, a lot of people are very familiar with the term human trafficking, and forced labor falls under human trafficking, but human trafficking also incorporates those involved in the sex trade, where forced labor is defined as situations of exploitation that a person cannot refuse or leave because of threats, violence, coercion, abuse of power, or deception. And this usually has to do with very manual work processes that are labor intensive. As of last year, the UN estimates there's about 40 million people worldwide that are enslaved in these industries. So these are agriculture, in mining and production. It really just depends on what country you're studying, and that will dictate the industries and who's involved. So with that effort, GIS experts looking into modern slavery and forced labor, it's highly contextualized, where every country, every region, every people group has their own industries that are prone to offenses in forced labor. So you have to have work alongside experts in a wide array of fields for anything useful to be done. Some examples of how this is played out in other countries. In India, it's been found that the brick production industry is a huge offender in forced labor. So there's a GIS study just a couple years ago, a really famous one, where machine learning and satellite imagery was used to identify these brick kilns that you could find through imagery. And they identified a bunch, and then were able to hand that off to anti-slavery organizations to investigate whether forced labor was happening there. And another example in Turkmenistan, the cotton harvests there, again using machine learning and satellite imagery, they could tell whether a cotton harvest was gathered using machines or by hand. And if it was gathered by hand, then there's a good chance that that slave labor was used. So these are just a couple of the ways that GIS has been used in other countries. My particular project will be looking into the artisanal cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Specifically, it's in this small little area in the southeast, represented by the blue that I'll talk about in just a second. So we're looking at the cobalt industry, white and cobalt. So cobalt, many of you have probably heard here and there, it's been in the news a bunch, but it is ubiquitous in modern electronics, in all of our cell phones, in laptops, our computers, our tablets, even electric vehicles. And cobalt is in nearly every battery that's rechargeable that we have. So because of that, there's huge demand for it as a resource, and up to estimated about 85% of the global cobalt supply comes from this blue area in Congo, known as the Copper Belt. It's roughly around 90,000 square miles. There's a couple other countries that have small deposits, but this is the largest in the world by far, making it a really interesting focus for study because it has such a defined barrier and an enclosed study area. So within the Congo, there are a couple of cobalt mining strategies that are in place. The first being large-scale mining, and this estimated to account for around 70 to 85% of cobalt mining output. Now, these are huge organizations that have a lot of capital, that have trucks and drills and explosives, and they're heavily regulated. There are a lot of international companies involved. So these really aren't your biggest offenders in forced labor, where my project will be focusing more on artisanal and small scale mining known as ASM. Within the Congo, for Congolese, it accounts for about 14 to 17% of livelihoods for the entire population. Now, I had mentioned that large-scale mining accounts for 70 to 85% of output. That's a bit confusing because with these large-scale mining operations, a lot of times these smaller ones, ASM, will pop up in their periphery and within proximity to them, they'll dig themselves and harvest cobalt, and then they'll sell their product to the large scale mining. So it gets blended into the total numbers, which skews what the international community is able to track, making it hard for researchers and everyone to put exact numbers on everything. That's just one of the ways that it's such a hard industry to truly understand. And that's just a small part. These are the ones that occur near large-scale mining, but many are in rural areas and heavily forested areas, off the grid, really rugged terrain. So they're even harder to find. So these ASM mining operations, they're hugely susceptible to forced labor for a number of reasons. The top probably being physical insecurity, in that a lot of these small mines are run or at least protected by armed militia groups who will take local populations on threat of force and force them to work at gunpoint many times. Many are brought in through debt bondage, where people get into financial trouble and are forced to work unpaid as slaves. And then there's human trafficking, and this will involve a lot of women and children, where they're stolen, kidnapped, and taken somewhere far from home and forced to work in these mines. As of at last count, there's an estimated 35,000 children enslaved in this small area in the Copper Belt. And again, these estimates, they're educated, but the actual number could be potentially much higher. So what can people like us do about this? That's a question that I'm looking into with my capstone project. There are a few things. I think the hardest piece is actually finding these mines that exist off the grid and in rural areas. They're hard to find, so there are other researchers who are proposing ways to look into this that I'll be building on. And once you're able to find mines, then you need to be, be able to say, well, which ones have a probability of having forced labor there? Because otherwise you're just going to be looking at every one and not fruitful. I'm going to take those first things and develop a machine learning package. I am working with some partners in this this endeavor that I've set up over the past year. And so this we have a client for this, and they're very interested in this work. We're working weekly towards this end. So first, we're going to look at mine identification and how to actually find these mines. So a lot of my research is based on a 2020 study undertaken by Dr. Chloe Brown and her team, which included Dr. Siddharth Kara, who's a leading mind in the modern slavery field. What they did, they took data from the Sentinel-2 satellites, radar images, and with those were able to create a differential radar interferometric analysis, where they're able to see surface movement, see where the ground has degraded or been dug, where tunnels have been created over a time period. With this, they just did a small study area of about 6,000 square kilometers within the copper belt that I've been talking about. And just in those 6,000 square kilometers, they found 215 mining sites of all. That's industrial, the large scale, and the small scale, down to just one person. So as I said, that's 6,000 as compared to the total area of the copper belt, which is about 90,000 square kilometers. So in Dr. Brown and team, in their research, they took 2 time-lapse radar images of an area, and then took the differences between them. They were collected at several points throughout 2016 to 2018. And with these differences, they found the negative values in the difference represented degradation of land, and were statistically significant in their ability to find these small scale mine sites. So what you see here, we have a couple of their products and examples that they were able to put out in their paper. They posit that other researchers in the future are able to take this forward. It's an extremely scalable study in that it's easily attainable data. It's a defined study area within the copper belt, so there's a small place that you're able to focus on. And it also produces the opportunity for additional analyses on these, which is exactly what I'm going to propose in just a minute. So that said, Alicia, we're working with Maxar. We have a partnership with you guys, and we're going to be working with INSAR, interferometric radar data from Maxar, where before they use Sentinel-2. So that's where we look to be able to identify these mines, pick them out, and then from there, we're going to look at defining which of these mines are likely offenders for forced labor. So for this, we're going to be taking indicators that are brought forth in the literature around this whole industry and developing an index according to which ones we think can best show the likelihood of forced labor. So the first of these I had mentioned a bit before is the presence of an armed militia. So with this, there's lots of literature on armed militias' use of forced labor in mining activities. They'll take over farms and power plants, whatever they can to have power in the area. This data is tracked through a bunch of organizations, but the International Peace Information Service has a specific focus in the DRC, specifically the Eastern DRC, all along the Rwanda and Burundi borders. So with this conflict data, they've already found a definite correlation between these small scale mines, armed militias, and forced labor in the Eastern DRC. Not yet in the Copper Belt, because they've been very focused on the East. So we need to find a way to find armed militia presence in the South. With that, we're going to use a few indicators that are also proposed in other literature. A 2019 study on political control and power infrastructure that shows these giant government-funded power infrastructure projects. They usually have protected government presence that will have less of an interest by armed groups. So armed groups usually stay away from these areas where the governments and the military are protecting. So for this, I've gotten a shapefile on the South Africa power pool, which is one of the most prominent power grids within the South DRC. It stretches all the way from the DRC down to South Africa. So it's pretty huge. And then for areas that aren't in the purview of them, we'll look at hydroelectricity, as it's a huge focus of the Congolese government, and buffered shapefiles on hydroelectric plants and dams and whatever else we can. I had mentioned before that the proximity to LSM is a good indicator for whether ASM exists. So you can find ASM around the periphery of these large-scale dig sites. So what that has to do with forced labor, it's of interest to us. I'll be studying. It's a secondary goal to determine if there's a relationship between large-scale mining and forced labor. Again, the data on LSM comes from IPIS, but also from the DRC government mining regulators, known as GECA mines. And last, but probably most theoretical, we're looking at economic instability. There's some literature that suggests the difficulty that people have in exiting the mining industry once they get into it. So they talk about the degradation of agriculture, abandoned farms, people that leave for the perceived stability that mining brings. So this is something that I'm going to note, but I'm going to suggest for future researchers to look into. It'd be a bit out of our scope, but it's still something to mention and to keep in mind. So with whatever indicators we can bring together, we're developing a heat index that's based on these indicators, where a higher rating would bring a higher likelihood of forced labor presence. And that combined with the mines that we've identified, we could then have a package to give to anti-slavery NGOs, to government regulators, to anybody that's interested in this, to give them more investigative power to help in the fight against slavery. So all this put together, the end goal of this will be a machine learning package. So this is something that I've learned through YouTube. I have not had a class in it yet. I have one course left at Penn State. So I was saving it for this, and I was hoping that I could find something where I could learn more, but YouTube is an incredible resource. So I've learned The ArcGIS machine learning tools are very easy to use. I've produced at least a couple of practice packages, so the proof of concept is there. But what I'll be doing is taking the method that Dr. Brown put forth and applying it to an ArcGIS deep learning package on the Maxar procured radar interferometry data. So with this, we'll be able to export training data to teach the machine what to look for to find these mines, and then we can train it to look at the entirety of the copper belts and then classify these objects and classify mines and overlay that with areas of interest regarding forced labor indicators. So that is that's my proposal. That's where we look forward to taking this. And with that, I look forward to questions and feedback that you guys might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Sky. Great job. Very interesting. Does anybody have questions?
Oh, let me pull up chat. Sorry.
There's one from Blake.
Oh, sorry. All right. Let's see. Blake, do you find it difficult finding data sources on this topic? Yes. Yes, we do. This is so I've been working in the international development field for the past 7 years, and data is always extremely hard. It's a thing I've noticed with Penn State in courses. The data in America is always really easy to come across, and the second you step into the developing world, it's really tough to find. The companies that do have it are very protective of it. So that's why we have to work with these other NGOs that have an interest, that have these specific focuses that they're looking at uncovering all of this stuff. So we're trying to work with as many of them as we can. Thank you. All right, Alicia, is there a timing aspect? As far as well, IPIS, the piece, the conflict data, they have time data on all of theirs. It's annual. That's usually what you come to. You don't really get the great nuance to timing everything that you're able to other places. Let's see. Sorry, it's popping up. Timing aspect. Have you considered using emerging hotspot analysis to find out how your hotspots have changed over time? That's a great idea. Yeah, we there are some areas, we have people on the ground there now who they know the big areas, you know, that there's some more well-known towns within the Copper Belt, Lubumbashi, that they know there's forced labor ASM in that area, and it just takes actual on the ground undercover investigators to look at this stuff. Yes, we are looking at focusing, but hotspot analysis would be very helpful. Brian, hey Brian, can you comment on opportunities and challenges of creating a project in conjunction with another entity? Yeah, the greatest problem that I've had right now for just being a capstone project is the timing between us. You know, I'm on a school schedule and they are not on a school schedule. So where they're in the planning stage and they're talking about setting up meetings for the summer, and I tell them, hey guys, I gotta present. And so I'm doing the lit review, and I'm doing the a lot of the coordination, and I'm kind of lighting fires that wouldn't normally be there for them. So it's been tough. There's also the matter of what you can talk about. So I haven't mentioned what organization. I'm under an NDA right now. So for anything that's public facing, I'm just an interested student. And yeah, it's just one of those tough tight wire acts. All right. Detweiler, is your methodology able to be adapted to other forced labor practices in other parts of the world? Well, to the mining sector, the radar interferometry would. There's that would mainly be regarding the indicators that we're looking at, and that's a definite thing that can be applied other places. It's pretty well documented, and it depends on just what country and context we're looking at. That's why we need partnerships and experts and all this stuff, because where we're looking at armed militias here, there may be other countries where armed militias are, godsend against the government. So they have to it's like keep in mind what the specific context of these developed, whatever country it is. Context is king. Let's see, what specific outcomes are you expecting to find other than location of mines? Could you or plan to share those findings with? Well, I'll say that's the organization that we're working with, and I didn't mention any of the conferences or anything, but there are specific human trafficking conferences that we're looking at taking this to maybe in 2022 once everything starts to open up more. But as far as let's see what outcomes we're having, this is working for a specific client that is interested in this specific area, where it could be once this project is done, then there will be a use case developed for other countries and other contexts too. But for now, we have a defined client for it. And from Beth, are there any differences in detecting mines in DRC versus Zambia? Are they operated similarly so that detection is the same? They're operated similarly, yes. So we could find mines. I think the copper belt, it's mainly in the DRC. It goes over the border a little bit, but the vast majority of it is within the DRC. So with that, the client that we're working for is just interested in the DRC, because to work in a country, you have to get government approval and get all these applications and things approved. It takes sometimes years. So to work in the DRC and Zambia just doubles your workload. Let's see, and Tesla committed. Yeah, I saw that just a couple days ago. So yeah, there's a really hard part of this is holding companies accountable. And I think part of it is just getting people to understand, because there's so much where, we have these, I'm looking at, 6 things in this room that have this cobalt in it. So trying to determine what the best practices in consumership is. So it's something that everybody has to determine for themselves. But I think the more people know about it, the more that companies feel the pressure to make commitments like Tesla has. Yeah, so appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, very nice job. If we don't have any other questions, then we can give everybody back some minutes. But great job to Sky and Alicia. You both did really well. And we have 2 presentations next, I think it's Monday. So if everybody can join us then, we'll see you then.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Good job.